Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's always good to follow lunch because it sounds like a lively crowd. We'll get you right awake and fully refreshed. It's a very exciting panel that we have lined up for you today. Our participants have a variety of professional experiences and backgrounds that should make this a very lively conversation. The instructions said there's a TV show format, so I'm not sure. Hopefully we'll have more civilized behavior than current TV shows. So to set a little background for the conversation today and to do a small advertisement for the Kellogg Foundation, I'd like to mention the Kellogg Foundation's been doing investments around racial equity since the 1960s. And in 2007, our board made the decision to call us an anti-racist organization. So everything we did in our activities for grant making, policies and procedures, and the way we ran our organization internally and externally had to reflect this commitment to be an anti-racist organization. So diversity, equity, and inclusion are very close to the daily work that we do and near and dear to our hearts at the foundation. To set the context for our industry and the investment side, in 2017, there were $69 trillion of investable assets, and only about 4% of that were managed by people of color or women, or firms owned by them. Specific to venture capital, there was a survey done by the National Venture Association in collaboration with Deloitte & Touche. They surveyed 217 firms, about 2,500 VC employees. Of that, 45% of the employees were female, so that's a good number. But only 11% of them were investment partners. And 95% of the roles that were administrative in nature were actually staffed by women. And looking at black VC employees, they only represent about 3% of the population, and there were no investment partners that were black in this survey. Yet, we find that research shows us that diverse teams tend to outperform. So how is it that there's a disconnect between the employee population and what the research is telling us? As investors, and in our conference today, we look at innovation, behavioral finance, and undervalued assets to try to deliver excess returns. So I look to our panelists today to find solutions as to how to operationalize and take advantage of this hidden asset that is the dividends that we could capture from diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'd like to open the conversation out to our panelists so they'll introduce themselves, give us a little bit of background on their professional history, and tell us one reason why the topic of our panel resonates with them personally. Mallun, would you like to?
So I'm Mallun Yen, and I'm the founder of Operator Collective, and I've been a founder and operating executive and in venture for many years, and also been often been someone who doesn't look like a lot of the other people in the room, and so have been looking at the problem of diversity, but how can you leverage diversity and underutilized resources to generate great financial gains? And so part of what we're doing with Operator Collective is, which we'll talk about I think in a little bit, is how do you do that effectively to actually make better decisions and get to better results and of course generate greater returns.
My name is Dong Song. I'm a professor in computer science at UC Berkeley, and I'm also the founder and CEO of a startup called Oasis Labs. At Oasis Labs, we raised over $45 million, and we built a privacy-first cloud computing on blockchain, essentially combining blockchain technologies and privacy technologies to help users to maintain control of their data and help organizations to use their data in a more responsible and privacy-preserving way.
Hi, I'm Brian O'Neill, the Chief Investment Officer of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. Our foundation is $11 billion in assets and is focused primarily on health. One of the things that I really enjoyed about working for a foundation is that my own values and our overall values are very aligned, and in fact, the foundation has been very involved in diversity and inclusion in the healthcare field. So my challenge in the last few years has been to convince people that the investment management business was also important to us, and I think I'm making some headway.
Hi, Areije Shakar from the Bahrain Development Bank, and I also run the venture capital fund of funds for the government of Bahrain. Ultimately, I think what resonates the most for me about this topic is the fact that I'm based in a region that's vastly stereotyped for being not inclusive to women, and ultimately I run a fund with a full female team, and it didn't just happen because they chose us, but it was just all merit-based.
Excellent. Well, thank you all for those excellent introductions. And Brian, if I could start with you, could you maybe tell us about the pipeline programs, the foundation's working on?
Sure. You know, I'll take this back to 2012, was the 40th anniversary of our foundation, and we looked at a lot of the things we'd done over our history, and what came up again and again as the most successful programs have been what we called the human capital programs, giving scholarships to medical students, nursing students, dental students, and promising medical researchers, particularly with an emphasis on underrepresented minorities. And as the importance of those programs really kind of was highlighted by that 40th celebration, so we can do that in investments. So the first thing we did was an emerging manager program, and we now have had an emerging manager program for 6 years, offering an opportunity to invest with firms, typically minority and women-owned firms that are just getting started. In addition to that, we have funded our first what we call pipeline programs. It's an organization called SEO, and it helps college students get the training to qualify for Wall Street analyst jobs when they graduate. We're looking at a couple of others, and I'll just say this. Last week I spent a day with Girls Who Invest, which is a 4-year-old program to try to bring more women into the investment management field. There were 90 of them gathered on the University of Penn campus, tremendous energy, tremendous enthusiasm, and for 4 weeks, they get a curriculum that's the equivalent to an undergraduate business degree. After those 4 weeks, they will spend the next 7 weeks working at a variety of investment management firms, and the hopes are that this will lead them to want to have a career in investment management. And that's what we mean by a pipeline program.
Excellent. Could some of the other panelists mention if you've been involved with pipeline programs as well, or any?
No.
No? So we can see that there's a clear demand here for an investment idea or to build up the talent that's coming into either our companies and also coming into our investment firms and foundations and allocating teams. Perhaps then if we could turn the attention to our operators, so that we've got 2 very distinguished practitioners within the technology field. And Mallun and Dawn, if you could maybe, starting with Mallun, share your experience and your journey as women leading teams in technology companies and what that journey's been like.
Sure. So when I was the VP of Worldwide IP at Cisco, we can even just start there, which is there were so few women in that position that when I got the position, it was a front page story it was legal press, but it was the front page story on the paper because there were only 6 other of us in the United States who had that position, because you generally had to have a technical degree, law degree, and then work your way up. And so have been looking at this issue and living with it for many years. But fast forward beyond that, when I was in my position, I helped start a company called RPX, which we took from 0 to 100 million and public in less than 3 years. And even though I helped start the company, I did not officially join until 18 months in. And so when you do that, you're not doing the daily hiring, you're not setting the culture. And I didn't even realize, because it's not like I interviewed at the company, right? Is that day one, when I walked in, I didn't realize that I was employee 65, and they were pretty much about 58 men. The women were in a smattering of events and administrative assistant roles, and I was number 2 in the company. The only person senior to me was the CEO, and it was hard for me. And I recognized it was hard for me coming into such a senior position of a company that I helped start. How hard is that for someone below to be optimizing and even deciding to work at that company? And then the other thing is RPX is not a household name. It's not founding a company like Twitter or Airbnb. And so we also realized that as you start to grow a company from that initial traction and getting it off the ground, and we were in San Francisco, we're trying to hire quantitative tech talent, doing patent risk reduction and insurance, super sexy. It's like you can't just go to the same people over and over again. So not only do I personally have a lot of desire to diversify for many reasons, but we had to, because we also couldn't go after the same hoodie-wearing computer science graduates that everyone else did. And so really learned over the years through trial and error how hard it is to diversify even when you're just 65. And so have done a fair amount of writing, as well as that's why we ended up with this fund that we've put together, is how do you actually bring natural networks of people that don't typically overlap to work together to make better decisions more effectively, more efficiently. So that's kind of why I'm passionate about this area. I lived it.
Yeah, great. And I love Mallun's passion and her mission. So I'm actually an LP in her fund as well. Yeah, so for me, I think given that I actually have experience both in academia and in industry, and the question about diversity, unfortunately, it's about the same, is that we actually need more diversity in both academia and in industry. And of course, given that there's a funnel feeding from one to the other, that's of course not surprising. So for me, both as as a female professor and also as a female founder and CEO, so what I see is one, actually, so from recruiting perspective, it's challenging and it's difficult to recruit both female students as well as female engineers and so on. And I have been trying to figure out how we can do better. And also even from my personal experience, I think it's actually interesting. For me in academia, when I was in academia, I didn't feel so much about being a female professor. There's, I didn't feel personally so much difference in terms of being female professor. Although there has been statistics showing that actually when students give course evaluation to professors, actually male professors actually tend to actually have better evaluation than female professors. And when I spend more time in industry, that's where I actually feel more about being a female founder and CEO. Actually, so I think actually there's even more challenge in actually being a female. So I have been reading this book called The Confidence Code. That was recommended by some of my friends. And when I started reading the book, I said, wow, this actually really explained some of the problems that I have even personally experienced. And also, I think it also helped explain why fewer women actually go into some of these more challenging areas. Mm-hmm. So the Confidence Code has a thesis about, so one, they actually talk about the confidence is the self-perceived ability is a better predictor even than IQ to a person's success. It's how well you perceive, not just your actual ability, it's how well you perceive your ability. It's a better indicator for your success than IQ. And then the book showed a lot of experimental results that people have done that actually men tend to have a higher self-perceived ability than women. So this, I think, also help us to give us idea how to better foster diversity and encourage women. Essentially, I think we need to help, especially the younger women, to understand this natural tendency and help them understand that they should actually go try bigger goals and try more challenges and have more confidence in themselves that they can actually achieve bigger things, and this will encourage them to do more in these challenging areas.
That's great.
I think another thing is the excitement that you feel about this kind of work is something that is very catching if more women and minorities could be exposed to this when they're figuring out what they want to do. Mm-hmm. And so that's another reason that we think these pipeline programs are very important, because a lot of the women and girls who invest really had never heard of investment management, and they didn't really know what it was, and they started saying, hey, this is a lot of fun. And I think these SEO and these Wall Street analyst jobs, maybe fun is not the right word for them, but challenging and prestigious and leading to a lot of opportunities, and people can really relate to that as well. And then finally on this is, these are organizations that are doing a great job, doing great work. They are financially needy. They could use more money. So for a foundation like us, who makes grants as what we do, for us to make grants to these organizations makes perfect sense. I think other foundations are starting to see it as well. And I think ultimately the investment management business is going to see that it's in their interest to fund them too. But again, it gets back to the excitement and enthusiasm that you feel and communicating that to young people.
I think also to add on to just the enthusiasm, I think it's also important to identify the sort of, I wouldn't say challenges, but the things that women are faced by. So women want to have families, they want to be able to contribute to their homes, and at the same time, and I mean, if I'm speaking from the Middle East, ultimately the woman is the one that stays at home, and she's the one who has to go on maternity leave. And then when we look at organizations whereby, the maternity leave is very short, and so the woman is worried, if I'm not going to be at the office, then, I'm going to lose the opportunity to get promoted. And all of these, very, I guess, obvious things that are ultimately, the fears that a woman has, and maybe actually attributes to the confidence, because a man doesn't have to face that. He doesn't have to get worried about getting pregnant for 9 months and having to go through morning sickness and, like things that, ultimately men don't have to go through. And if she has to not come to work for the first few weeks of her pregnancy, and what is her boss going to think of that? And I think, me being a female manager, I have that empathy. So I have women that have children. Sometimes they have to stay home because their son is sick and she doesn't want to leave him at home, doesn't have someone to take care of. But we're in a global world where technology plays a huge role. So if a woman is at home, working from home because she wants to be able to look at her child, I think organizations need to be open in allowing and have the flexibility, because how can a woman succeed is that she needs to have the comfort of knowing that if she's not able to make it to work because of something that's going on at home, she can work at home and it's not going to affect her end of year review. And that happens. And I think it happens globally and not just in our region. And what we've done, I think, and I can speak for Bahrain in particular from my experience, is that in our organization, over 50% of the employee workforce are women. We have women in senior positions. We're not a very large organization, but I have a seat at the executive table. Bahrain has also been identified as the top country for female founders, actually going above Silicon Valley. And let alone we still get this stereotype that, oh, the Middle East, women are covered, women can't do anything. But it's not like that. Women are encouraged and the confidence is there. And I think a part of that is the role models. So I mean, I always say I usually shy away from panels like this, and I say, I don't like to blast out that I'm a woman and I need an excuse to or like a helping hand. Because I believe in meritocracy and merit-based. And I don't have children yet, but I know that when I got married, I had a lot of men at, my peers that were like, yes, she's married, now she's not gonna make it, And they were waiting for me to fail. I would see, they're like, oh, well, yeah, now she's gonna come back from her honeymoon, and let alone, I'm lucky because I have a supportive husband, and I think that also plays a part. And I think it's a lot about the culture and education that even when you choose your spouse or your partner, someone who's encouraged. I mean, I leave and I travel a lot, and he's back home in Bahrain, and he's fine, and he, there isn't that sense. And I think it's enthusiasm of what you do, it's the confidence, but also the role models and the ability to have that kind of support system, which actually helps.
Oh, so along the lines of what these folks just said, which is, it would be great if the world were a meritocracy, but it's not. And we know that it's not. And knowing that there's differences and perceptions of people, I think is very key to, and I know a lot of work that you guys have done in making sure that that your own organization lives it, which is, there's studies that show, as you said with the confidence code, is when a woman professor is rated lower than the male professor. But if you can do things like knowing that, if you know that, you can actually fix that by saying, if you give an intro, like if Carlos intros and says, hey, this is Dawn. She is the most amazing MacArthur genius. She's founded this blockchain company, the blah, 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 blah. And then when she speaks, the studies show that she's rated higher than when she doesn't get that intro. You did a good job of introducing yourself too, and so there are things that we can do by saying you recognize it's not a meritocracy, but you can do things like that. And then the other thing with the pipeline problem is studies show that even beyond at the college level, 71% of women hold their assets in cash. And some people say, well, that's because women are risk averse. But actually what Sally Krawcheck says, and some of you are familiar with Sally Krawcheck, she says women are not risk averse, they're risk aware, which is if they don't have access to the information, they tend to not want to invest because I would say they're not stupid. And so, and we've done a really bad job of getting women access to the information in a way that's comfortable for them. And so what you're doing with your program, right, is making it very accessible to these young women to be able to enter this program. And so are there things that can get to the fact that there are differences with how men and women are perceived, are treated, what they're comfortable doing, and when you can recognize that, then you can come up with programs, ways of introducing people, having accessibility, having leave programs that can help get to the root of the problem.
Excellent. Areije, could you talk a little bit about some of the work that you're doing? You're creating a bridge for Bahrain with the rest of the world, and that's led to some impact at the ecosystem level and some also from your personal example. Would you be able to share that with us?
Sure. So our Fund of Funds program is ultimately focused on building venture capital capability in the region. So a lot of the different countries in the GCC have been working hard to basically build the technology ecosystem and take the lead and be the primary venue for startups. And so our work is to help support, and we've invested in funds in the region, and we're also looking at investing in funds that are based out of the region to help bridge markets and potentially have success stories whereby startups that then start to grow and then are acquired by funds or investors that are based across the board. And I think some of the things that I've noticed just in my interactions and my recent travel into ecosystems such as the ones in Silicon Valley is, firstly, it's a surprise that I'm a female that's leading the fund management of the fund, and then the next surprise, it's, oh, you guys are all women. How'd you guys do it? And how did you guys convince them? And I never thought about it. And something that you said, in a perfect world, it would all be based on merit. But I think sometimes maybe it was by mistake, or maybe it was I was the only one available that would actually take this role within the government at the time. But I think that sometimes you are given that opportunity, and it's ultimately trying to build that capacity. And I do have women within my team who say, I don't want to travel. I can't travel. I don't want to leave. And there was a lot of things, and the lack of confidence that you were mentioning. But I think that when you lead by example, and I'm doing it, I'm going there, and I'm taking, I'm traveling, and I'm going, and I'm coming back, and it's long distances, that you start of showcase that these things are possible. And sometimes you have to be the guinea pig or the first person that paves the way. But I think I'm lucky because I was born in Bahrain, but I was raised all over the world. So all my life I've had to ultimately try to prove who I am or explain my background or try to do that. So I think that element of having the confidence was kind of erased because I've always been, the person that didn't look like everybody else. I always had to be that international, lady that had to explain why during, the month of Ramadan I'm not eating and drinking water with everybody else who's having lunch. And so it's simple situations like this from a personal experience that I think makes it easier for me to come and travel and meet different people because I've just done it all of my life. And from a gender diversity, I think it just showcases the fact that our team has been successful. We've deployed 50% of our fund, and it was tough trying to get the trust of our LPs, which are government organizations, to believe in venture. So we have some members in leadership who believe in venture and want to do this for the future, and others who've just been arm twisted to do this because somebody told them to. And then having, a team, and sometimes we're joked, they're like, oh, you need some more men in the room. And I said, no, we need competent people with me and the team to make this successful. And when you become these spokespeople, whether you're a female or a male, that actually, showcase that it's the ability that actually takes it across the border, then it's great. And I hope that, I become an example to other women in the organization, and then for the country itself, and hopefully for the region as we start to grow.
Great. Thank you. So we've heard for the need of pipelines and also personal experiences of challenges that are faced and perhaps some of the reasons how you can overcome it, like helping frame a presentation. And I would like to open the question for the whole panel about there's a growing demand for diversity. So what are some of the things that GPs and LPs could be doing better? What opportunities does the search for? There's this evolution to try to continue to improve, right? So if diversity is part of that evolution to look for an edge, what are some of the opportunities that we have available as LPs working with GPs, as investors maybe working with operating companies? What are some of the things that we can bring to the table or we can ask our partners to bring to the table?
Well,
any volunteers?
I guess I'll answer that a little bit differently, just to go back to some of the issues about women's progress sort of on the job. Mm-hmm. Most companies and organizations say, well, our employees are our most important resource. Mm-hmm. And yet then they don't act that way. And particularly in terms of having a family-friendly workplace, I think that's crazy. Because I think if you don't do that, you will drive out good employees, you will retain lots of good employees, and you will lose your most important resource. So I think being a family-friendly employer is win-win-win. Everyone is better off. It turns out everybody prefers that, and you get to keep talented women who have other priorities in life, but work is very high among them. So I would say just to speak to that, I think that is really important.
Brian, I wanted to jump in on that point, and I don't know what the experience has been at the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, but one of the things we did at Kellogg was the maternity and paternity policy is now 6 months. And we went through that, and we have a small team, and then we had men starting taking off 6 months for paternity leave, and it was an adjustment for the team, but you realize that it also is not only important for the father as a fatherhood experience, but it's also important for the women that are taking the time off, because all of a sudden it puts you sort of an equal footing. And I'm glad you mentioned being a family-friendly employee and the employer and the importance of human capital, because in the end, are there some things that we could operationalize to make ourselves better as an employer and an organization to deliver better results in the end?
Right. And you know, those rules are important, but just being flexible and recognizing that life, you know, happens and that things don't get scheduled in advance. I think that's really important for people to just to know that if something comes up, their needs are important to you too.
Absolutely.
I mean, I think that's definitely something that I'm working hard on. And I mean, in our organization, we don't have those rules. So our maternity leave is only 3 months, only for women. And after that, she has to come to work, and it's like cutthroat. So if she misses a day, she needs to have a medical certificate or things like that. But I think for me, I mean, I can control what happens in my team. And so I have a lot of women that work in a fully female team, and they know if their son is sick or whatever, they're allowed to not come and make it up whenever they can. And I think what is very important is, to have to fight for these things. And you need to voice out, and you need to go up, and you need to push, and you need to do that. Or like you said, if I leave, then maybe that will be an example that, and why we leave. I think organizations and ultimately people need to realize that if you want to manage talent, it doesn't matter what the gender is, but how do you actually make sure that a talented female is able to actually succeed and become CEO or CFO or COO? And how would she do that? And why would she want to actually climb the ladder? Is because she knows that she has that kind of flexibility within her working hours and within her responsibilities as a female. So I think that ideally for me, if in a perfect world, if the Bahrain Development Bank started to tell me, Areije, you know what, if you get pregnant, you have 6 months maternity leave, and then after that you have the flexibility of your hours, then I'd stay and continue my career. But if that's not there, then I will go after that employer. And I think this is a great opportunity for employers who want to retain talent to build these kind of programs.
And I think, like what I said earlier, I think it will be really helpful to build an environment that is supportive and also really help raising awareness, especially to younger women, to understand some of these intrinsic discrepancies. So for example, there has also been studies showing that apparently there was a study for math tests, and the math tests initially showed that men, actually the male students were doing better than the female students. But then when they looked into more detail, they realized that for some of the difficult problems in the math tests, the female students didn't even try. And then when they readjusted and told the female students that they should try to solve these challenging problems, then the result came out that the female students were doing just as well as male students. And also there have been studies showing that, so this is an example from one company where they show that on average, women will only apply for a promotion if they feel that they are 100% match for the job description. But for men, they will apply even if it's just 60% matching the job description. So I think these are all examples showing that oftentimes females, when they don't know about these, for whatever reason, their intrinsic tendency, that they don't ask for more and they don't try more. Either it's because of this lack of confidence or afraid of failure and so on. But then if you do give them the opportunity, they can really succeed and shine. I think if we can collectively as a community to provide more support and also raise awareness, especially for the younger women, to realize this, then this will really help them grow, and I think overall can really help the whole society.
Absolutely, absolutely. Did you want to add something?
So my Operator Collective has a large number of operators and founders as LPs in the fund, hence the name of the fund. And sometimes, I have phenomenal people like Dawn, as well as folks like Areije and Jennifer Tejada and Claire Hughes-Johnson, the CEO of Stripe. And, but the thing about it is not only are they extraordinary leaders and founders of all the companies that we want to be investing in, is that it also happens to be that they're 90% women, 40% people of color, and 20% immigrants. And people have asked me, how did you do that? And they're all sort of brilliant leaders in and of themselves, and then they just happen to have those statistics. But one of the things that we did when we built this is we made it safe, we made it accessible, we made it flexible, because it's not just we have one COO who's a woman who's in this collective, we have 15. And so we have the flexibility, because oftentimes, and we are generalizing a little bit here, but it does happen, which is women tend to not sign up for things unless they feel like they can give 150% to it. And so if we had built this by saying, you have to spend 2 hours a week to do this, they'd be like, I can't do that. Whereas, it might be different with other people, and so when you're building these programs, you the thing about being very thoughtful and intentional about making it accessible for the people who, if you can actually get them to participate. I mean, the people that I've mentioned are some of the most busy people in the world, but they are participating because you make it safe and accessible, both the men and women, frankly. But there just happens to be a large number of women, and so everything that you guys are saying completely resonates, and so. When you can bring that together, and then the other thing that you can show is that if you can bring that together, you can harness this, and this fund happens to have a lot of really great women in it in a large number, but it's not a diversity fund, right? It is about generating the best returns that we can by tapping these underutilized resources who are brilliant leaders who happen to be 90% women. So I totally echo what you guys have said. And there's ways of doing it, right? We don't have to do it the same way everyone else has done it for years.
So besides the enthusiasm, as a foundation, we believe that what Mallun was building has a lot of commercial value to it, and that's why we're investors in the fund as well. And we think bringing the right people under the right conditions is transformative, and we're seeing that in the early runnings of this. So looking forward to the results. We'd like to open the floor for questions. If anybody has questions of our panel, we'd be happy to entertain them. All right, I can keep going too, but it'd be good to hear from the crowd.
How do you think of separating out gender equity and racial equity? Is there a different thought process between the two and how all of you think about your work?
So did you guys see the study that just came out a couple weeks ago? I think it was out of the University of Pennsylvania. And there was some bad news, and then there was some less bad news. So the bad news was diversity programs work best for the people who are most open to having diversity programs. So not so great, right? And so for the people who aren't open to it, it didn't really do much. But what it actually did find is that they also beta tested a number of things, which is when they had diversity programs directed to women, it actually helped with respect to racial perceptions as well. So you can kind of do double duty there, because a lot of the data does have to do with women, because it's a bigger data set and you're able to test it. And so it's sometimes harder to get the racial one. So it's not a great answer for you, except that when you can do the gender piece, the studies have supported that it actually helps the racial equity piece as well.
Maybe just adding to a different angle to that question. So as a person from the Middle East, where the majority of our wars and trouble has been based on religion and different sects within religion, how do you guys think about inclusion from a religious perspective, and not only from race and sex?
That, in this country, that seems to come up less. Maybe it's the world that I live in, where, I think there's religion is a much lower profile aspect of who someone is in the workplace than in other parts of the world. So, other than making allowances for people's faith practices, really doesn't come up too much.
In our organization, it has come up as we've done a lot of internal work around biases and ability to communicate as a team. And within our team, we have people that are very committed Christian practitioners, and we have somebody that joined our team who's Muslim, and then we have somebody who's Jewish, all very active, I think, within their religious communities. And our experience has been, the first thing we realized is we didn't have a prayer room within our building for somebody that wanted to pray during the workday. And so that's something, we had several nursing rooms, but not, and even meditation rooms, but not one necessarily for, and so we've created that within our space. And also, we've created, I think, we've sort of tried to force the conversation a little bit, so we start connecting, because you can have all these people of diverse backgrounds and just get together and talk about the weather and technical investment terms, and not, right, and not necessarily connect at a deeper fundamental level. And I think we've created the space formally to have these conversations, and they've been incredibly helpful as an organization.
Hi, I was curious to know if you all have evolved the diversity and inclusion conversation to also include cognitive and neurodiversity, and just how people process information, how they attempt to solve problems, and the differences of how that can add to the investment process in conjunction with the gender and racial and ethnicity conversation.
I mean, I can talk about sort of my team. I think for us, not everyone on the team has an investment background or has sort of an MBA or a finance degree. I think that what is important is I think that there's a lot of things that, if there's an interest, and, some people are interested in entering the investment world, is the ability that some of these things can be taught, within the on the job. But at the same time, I have, 2 women that have more of a creative background and have a lot more to do sort of from the arts perspective, and I think that has helped us a lot in just managing the operations of the fund and the whole processes. And when sometimes we're just looking at technical terms and investment terms, we forget that when you're managing a fund of funds, there's a lot of different moving parts. And I think that, from my perspective, I've realized that although, having people with a very strong investment background, because a lot of the jargon and the things that we are faced with while we're investing is important, I think it's also important to have that diversity from the thought process and the problem solving, because there are a lot of different elements, and especially from a very, diverse and global world, that, things that come up that people that with a different type of background can actually add a lot of value and help make your team or your firm stand out.
Yeah, that question, it's really very subtle. A lot of people in the investment business tend to be basically optimistic, or we heard this morning, equities optimists, fixed income pessimists. And I had a colleague who has since moved on to another organization who was the most pessimistic person I've ever met, and was a great member of the team, because he could think up doomsday scenarios that I would never have dreamed of in a million years. Say, what about that? What about that? And it really forced you to think differently about things. And even if we never actually thought those things would happen, really thinking about them was actually very valuable. So yeah, there is a lot of different dimensions to it. And I think that you try to build them into your team, or if you don't have them, try to find ways to sort of have that as a role that somebody plays.
So we may have time for one more question if there's somebody from the audience. Oh, all right.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Carl from Jerk Capital. As a father of a young daughter, at least for the women on the panel, what's the best advice you've got, and what I could tell my daughter that's kind of helped you get through a lot of the challenges you faced in your professional life?
I was just talking to Carlos about this. I come from a family of 3 girls, so we're all women. My dad actually had to grow up with all of us. I think what really helped for me, and I was telling Carlos this, was that I never thought I was different as a female. And especially coming from a region where, the women are, set up to, like, once they finish university, they need to get married and then have children and all of that. I think it just was never brought up. My dad kept pushing us to challenge. He put us in situations where he made us independent. And even though we come from a region whereby the man usually takes care of the woman most of the time, my father, the minute I was educated and had the tools, was like, you're on your own now. And although, I mean, I was lucky enough to live at home, but a lot of those responsibilities were mine. And I think that that's just a part of subtle empowering your daughter to be able to know that she can do whatever she wants. And as crazy as it may be, allowing her to take those decisions and make them and fail and then come back, but realizing that, you know, there is that support system. And that's kind of like what we're talking about in an organization, is that allowing women to try, and if they can't make it because of whatever the reasons, at least you've given that environment to support. So I would say just treat her like you would your son. And you know, and don't differentiate that, and you'll see that you'll reap the benefits. At least that worked for me.
So I don't know if this applies just to a daughter, but some of us. So I grew up with immigrant parents who still don't really speak English, and in a lot of immigrant families, the kids are separated from the adults at dinner tables, and you don't speak about adult things. You only talk about like food, piano, and school. And so you don't grow up knowing actually how to like talk to people in social situations. And that took me a very, very, very long time. Some of us were late bloomers, right? To learn to do that, and a very long time to get comfortable public speaking. So one thing, if you have a daughter or you have a woman on your team, and actually this applies to men on my team as well, which is very early on, what I do is that it's incredibly empowering to be comfortable speaking in front of people. And if you can get that skill, that'll get you, put you a long way forward. And so I had some really tough love by some really great male bosses who, when I would speak at something, they would come up to me and say like, that kind of sucked, right? And I'm like, okay, I know, like, what am I supposed to do about it? And I went to speaker training. And so there's things like that that don't just apply to a daughter, but are incredibly empowering, especially for women, to give them the confidence to be able to speak. But I apply that to the men on my team too.
I think I really appreciate that when I was growing up, my parents never really like told me what to do and gave me a lot of freedom. And I think that gave me a lot of opportunities to explore what I liked and just try out things. And I think in general, this is very important to like help your daughter to find out what she enjoys, what she's passionate about, and let her just try things out. I think that would be very helpful.
Yeah. Well, for my final question, I would just like to ask the audience to join me in giving a round of applause to our panelists. It was a great panel.